Welcome to the show, Fearless Leaders. Before we begin, I want to briefly remind you that we are in an enrollment period of Forward Fearless, which is our online group coaching program. This is essentially the Allowed classroom, and it's a place where you can connect with other leaders and really go deep. So this is quite a transformative experience. It's a deep personal coaching experience. It's a small group. We get to know each other very well, and you will really get to see what it's like to apply the principles and practices that we talk about on Allowed in your own leadership and in your own life. So I really hope that you can go check that out. If you're at all curious about it, just go check it out. And you can see other resources we have at caneel.com/podcast, where you can find other tools and freebies and videos. And we actually record all these conversations live. So I think it's really fun to always see a podcaster in conversation with, the friends that they bring on. And certainly for me, I'm so lucky that I get to bring on friends, and which includes today's guest, John Foster.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, John. So awesome to see you here. I think the last time that I saw you in person was at our Conscious Leaders Dinner in Santa Monica.
Yeah, it was a great night. It was really fun.
It was a magical night. And it was so cool that you were there, and that led, of course, to, you referring a couple of your employees from TrueCar into our program.
Yep.
Thank you. And that's been amazing. So just as context, listener, John and I, I don't know how we found out about each other, but what we did find out is that we share a common past employer.
And a very interesting one at that. Yeah.
A very interesting one, which I'm not at liberty to discuss. So we had a really interesting, shared cultural experience in slightly different timeframes, and that's a kind of a bond that is kind of unparalleled, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can see people pawing through LinkedIn right now trying to figure this out, but I don't think you can from mine. So
it's a mystery.
I think we're safe.
Yes, we're safe. It's a secret. It's always been a secret. So yeah, so it's so cool that we've been connected, and we have a lot of things in common. So we're big on organizational culture. We really see the value of the human being, especially the whole human being. We believe in conscious leadership and leading from above the line, and or just knowing where you are. And then also we have a design thinking background, right? And so we both kind of approach this from this human-centric, innovation, creativity-based approach of if we can get into empathy, we can create solutions that we never would have created from our own mindset. And That's a lot of what it seems like you're about, John.
Yeah, I would add to that just the idea of fear, and how if you can feel safe, you can take more risks. So that's central to good creativity and really good innovation. So there's a very big overlap there in what design and sort of conscious leadership are about.
It definitely is. I think one of the things that got me even more interested in the growth of the human being was doing more innovation work and experiencing in myself that in order to let go enough to really be able to see from the point of view of a user and to innovate from that space and kill my darlings and the ideas I thought were so great.
Mm-hmm.
It was an internal process that was seriously in my gut.
Yeah, for sure.
In my gut. So this is, this show is really a jumpstart for your personal growth and your personal development. So listeners, I really want to encourage you to continue your growth journey after the show is over. And I want to partner with you on that journey. So let's get started and dig into what our topic for today is with John. Today we're discussing the importance of empowerment and reciprocity as individuals and as leaders in the organizational development roles like CEO, CPO, HR. These are two vantage points. So empowerment and reciprocity. And they're really fun to explore as individuals, but also as leaders. And as you know, here on Aloud, I see you and I know you are a leader. And that has nothing at all to do with your title, even if you are a CEO. There are some CEOs who are not leaders because it's a choice to be the leader of your own life and your own self. So this is a huge topic, this one of how do I actually empower others to understand themselves as the leaders of their own lives, while I, and I'm speaking for you a little bit here, John, my job is to create a container for your development. So there's a little bit of a power hierarchy here, right? John, you're a chief people officer at TrueCar.
Yep.
How long have you been there?
Just over a year. Mm-hmm. And it's a role I've had at other places like Hulu and IDEO. So and I've had interim HR, head of HR roles in between. So it's commonplace for me over the past 10 or so years. And it is a place to create a container. I like that. So one of the reasons I initially started following Aloud, even beyond the idea that I already knew who you were, and I think what you say is great, was just the way you created that space. And I think I even posted comments at the very beginning that that's a brilliant way to conceive of this work, because it's almost like you have to have the courage to create space, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of vision, but then you have to get out of the way because you're creating space. So it's kind of this contradiction where you're putting boundaries and edges on things so others can come in. But once you create that space, you then have to get out of the way. And it's this push and pull. I call it facilitation. You're trying to make it easy for people to grow. But making it easy sometimes requires a prompt or a push. So it's not always about being nice. It's about, creating space. So I like Aloud a lot. Yeah.
Holding. So do you know the origin of the word facilitate?
I was just going to say, I think facile is easy, right? I don't know where it came from, but that's how I understand it.
Yeah, facilare. I'm probably saying it with an Italian accent, but it's a Latin word, and it does mean to make it easy, to create ease, which is like, wow, what a language that has a word that means to create ease. Oh, I just love that so much.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to be able to chase after, because it's like a contradiction. If you're working really hard to make it easy, you get, it's like watching someone who's a great athlete or a great musician. They can do their things so well, it looks easy, but you have to work hard to get there.
Yeah. So in your experience, as I know that you've also coached in your role and also not in your role and independently. So you've really got this very broad lens on, I think, the hard parts about what it really takes to endure the sometimes challenging experience of creating space for others and for failure.
Yeah.
And learning.
I came from the world of adventure learning, and my earlier career. Experiential learning and adventure-based activities are these sort of metaphoric or generalized playgrounds where you can go and be yourself. We used to call it, come here today and show up as yourself, and you'll learn something.
Is this like rock climbing, outdoor stuff?
Yeah, ropes courses, whitewater rafting, crazy stunts you do in the wilderness, like they do on the show. What's it called? Survive. Was it Survivor? Sorry.
Survivor.
I think I missed the big time because I was getting paid like $100 a day to do these things, and then they have them on TV, and Mark Burnett's like a billionaire. So, but the idea was you would have these problems to solve that are fun and they're big and they're challenging, but then you catch yourself being yourself. And so great facilitation in that environment was being able to set up a really great problem and then not direct people through it, but let them struggle. In a couple of my early training work, I created 2 tools for facilitators. One was the idea that at the beginning of an activity, you are in charge of everything because you're the only one that knows what's going on, and they know nothing. And you want to see that on a chart switch so that you go to nothing and they go to everything. And that was one thing. The other thing was this idea of a save versus strand continuum. So you can either save somebody with a helpful tip or something, or you can strand them and let them figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's not always, you don't know when you're going to do that until you can check in on the situation.
Yes. There are so many micro judgment calls in between those two. And it takes attunement, right? And it also is, kind of constraint based.
For sure.
It's so funny, John, that you're talking about this because so we bought a refrigerator, I don't know, 6 months ago, and it's made by Samsung. And it had a freebie that came with it from the appliance store that was one of the robot vacuums. It was like the Samsung robot vacuum.
Okay.
So Roy and I bought an iRobot, probably was the second generation. This is 10 years ago. And we actually named it. His name was Rosie. And it was because we didn't have any kids. We didn't have a dog. It was like our little pet. Okay. And when we would turn it on, I remember us, watching anxiously, new parents, what's it going to bump into? And we have to stop ourselves and give it space to learn. And because the robot vacuums, they map out your space, but the only way they can do it is by bumping into walls.
Right.
So we got this robot vacuum, and our house is a really weird layout. So I never took it out of the box. I thought to myself, somebody that I know will need this. And either way, it's next to the pile of our donations. So then COVID happened, and we don't have any help around the house, and we actually used to, which was really lovely. So I decided to take out the robot, and just today, I was coaching my kids through because they kept stopping the vacuum.
Right.
They wanted to pick it up.
They were saving it. Yeah.
They were saving it. They were heroing the vacuum. We talked about heroing. We did a deep dive on heroing behavior, which is a kind of below the line leadership behavior.
Right.
On episode blank. And then that is exactly what was happening. So, my daughter is a bleeding heart and just, totally open, kind of Enneagram type 2. And so she would go and she'd pick up the vacuum and she'd bring it to the spot where she thought it'd be more comfortable. My son is all anxious. He's kind of like a type 6 right now. And he would save it from going up the stairs. And I'm you guys, we have to give it space to learn. Literally today. But
imagine if you're doing that with a real human instead of a robot, it's even probably harder, right?
Because there are real consequences, right? I can imagine that,
right. It truly shows up as parenting too.
Yeah. So, the capacity to hold space like that for others to grow. I mean, the idea that you've been able to install that into multiple organizations, that there are lots of individuals who suddenly are able to hold each other as they grow. That's a phenomenal, overwhelming achievement.
So I think you give me a little too much credit for actually installing it. I experienced it a couple times in places like IDEO. IDEO is a place that has built that from the ground up and has created cultural terms and symbols to create space. They have their brainstorming rules up on the wall in every room, and you're taught as a new IDEO person how to behave in a way that's not going to crush other people's ideas with language and process. They have things like the baby bird. If you said somebody at IDEO, what's the baby bird? They'd say that's a fledgling idea. And so you want to hold it in your hands very carefully, but you don't want to crush it. So there's lots of ways to symbolize that creating space. I think when you're a leader in a normal company, because IDEO is far from normal, they're just really good at this.
And IDEO is for those listeners who don't know, it's internationally famous, iconic, really class building product design, initially product design company that now has gone into every form of design, service design, organizational design. industrial design. It's really a top notch in the world of human-centered design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go on.
And they're often recognized for just being one of the most innovative companies in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason they're able to do that is they can take different perspectives and build them together to create a higher outcome than you could have gotten with the individual point of view. And that's really hard to do because most people, if you're below the line, you're going to fight about it. If you're above the line, you're going to say yes and you're going to
Mm-hmm.
create. And so you need a culture to constantly do that. And I think they figured out how to do that pretty well. Importing that into, one of you said something earlier about constraints. Time is a very difficult constraint because most of us don't have unlimited time. And sometimes too much time lets you just behave like without any urgency, but not enough time can make you overly aggressive because you start to panic. Oh no, we're not going to get this done. So I guess those are some of the things I would think about when you're saying do this inside of a company. There's also people that are they're afraid. So they're at work and they're trying to prove themselves and trying to get that person. So when you talk about empowerment, they might have the freedom to do something, but they're not ready because they're afraid. So it takes work like this to help them grow.
What does empowerment mean to you?
Well, I think power, just in its own sense, is the ability to get something done or the capacity to do something. But I think empower means you also have the opportunity. So someone might have the capacity, but not the freedom. Or someone might also have the freedom, but not the capacity. So it's both.
They might have the capacity, but not the capacity is their ability, their...
I'd say it's their ability, it's their wholeness. That's got to be, they have to have the courage and some of the intangibles too, not just the skills. Some highly skilled people don't get things done because they're not operating at full power.
Wow. So this word capacity, I mean, that's a word that it literally means how much can your container hold? Mm-hmm. So, and that's, I'm seeing the relationship you're drawing between that and courage.
Yeah, so, it's got to be, I mean, human performance is a lot more complicated than skill and knowledge. There's so much more to it, and it's all around the stuff that's on your show.
As a manager, as a parent, as a team member, do I have the ability to impact others' capacity?
You can impact it. I'm a firm believer in choice. And so certainly as a teacher, you can teach people certain things, but at some point they have to choose to do it. And that's the point where they become truly empowered because they're choosing.
What might predispose somebody to be ready to choose it? To choose the path of empowerment, to choose the path of growing their capacity? Is that something that everybody can do equally, or?
I think everybody has the potential to do it. I think it's a natural human thing. And when we talk about maturity, I think that's part of it. So I guess a piece of it would be emotional intelligence. Can I control my emotions? Do I understand them? Do I have the social skills to interact productively? That's part of it. I can be super smart, but not great with my social skills and therefore derail or blow up or whatever those things are. I think some of it's vision. I have to have the desire and the inspiration and the passion to see something that's unfinished and what it could be. So those are elements. So vision, emotional intelligence, and then there's courage. We used to call it courage and creativity, I guess. And that one of the companies where I did this adventure work, we had a model that was very similar to the conscious leadership model. And frankly, it wasn't as elegant and easy. So but it was the same, it was based in the same psychology. We called it playing to win versus playing not to lose. So in playing to win, you're being creative and you're above the line, and playing not to lose, you're being defensive and you're below the line. It's for the same stuff. It's just way easier to position yourself with that binary above or below. It's very hard to say, am I playing to win or playing not to lose?
Yeah, well, there's a huge body of research on this. That's so interesting. I hadn't connected those dots before. What I'm mapping this onto is being prevention focused, versus being promotion focused. And from my understanding is, we might individually, me as an individual, I might be predisposed to wanting to prevent things from happening, or I might be predisposed to wanting to help make things happen, promote things. But mostly this is actually a state of mind that is highly sensitive to the environment. So the environment will cue you about if you are to be promotion or prevention focused. And listeners, this is the coolest experiment. So try this out like right now. If you have access to a table or a steering wheel, or your like thighs, you can do this. So take your hands and press down on the table, like really, really hard. Okay, now press up on the table.
Brilliant.
From underneath. And see how that feels different in your body. John, are you doing it?
Yeah. If I press up hard, I'm going to knock my computer off, so I can't really do it. I get
but
it
even the motion, can you feel it? What is it? What's the difference? What do you feel?
Well, pushing down is all closed and tight, and pushing up is opening,
yes.
and light.
Yes. So some of the laboratories, some like the best top-notch, like best research universities in the world, the research they've done on this mindset, this state of mind actually, is that they use this as a manipulation to change, like, are you in the promotion experiment group or are you in the prevention experiment group? Pushing away cues that prevention focus. And you think about it, like in the wild, this would be like pushing something away from you. And it's like, I don't want that. And it creates this entire whole body and mental and emotional state versus the simple switch of like flipping my hands and pulling up is, I literally feel like a surge of love when I do that.
Well, this is why we like the adventure stuff, because it's somatic and it's your full body, and people discovered feelings and experiences they never did when they were sitting in their classrooms and sitting in their offices. So when you're panicked that you're going to fall and die, and your brain's saying this is stupid, but we can teach you that you're wearing a harness and you're safe and we can prove it, then you have a real choice. And you could say, I'm going to step out into the open here, jump off this thing into the air 30 feet above the ground. And we found it really actually had to be 60 before people would really be afraid. Whoa. So you want to get to a place. Now, I'm not talking about bungee jumping. Bungee jumping is actually way more dangerous because you don't know what's going to happen. We knew what was going to happen. There's a lot of science and engineering that goes into these safety systems, and they were redundant. We proved it. We had safety inspections and crazy, good care of our stuff. But, you can literally see the difference between choosing to make the choice and not choosing, because it is rationally very clear that this is safe. And so those kinds of things really help you separate out your body and your emotions and your brain. And that's really helpful.
That's so fascinating. Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. And by the way, I did a bunch of this work when I was like 16 years old.
Yeah, it's wasted on youth. It's so fun, right? You just want to climb.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I don't think so. Not for me. I was a chicken, so it worked. But okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So you're saying that if I'm 60 feet above the earth and I've got on a harness and you've proven to me that I'm safe because I'm carabinered and I'm attached and I'm gonna live if I jump. And I talked to Gay Hendricks was on the show a couple weeks ago, and I talked about my like weird fear of heights. So he shares with me. So you guys on the show, you know this about me. So you can imagine me being up there and like trying to jump, and I can even smell like the different smell of sweat that I get when I'm doing something like that.
Their legs start shaking, they sweat, they chitter and chatter and scream.
Yeah, and it's exhilarating. But you're saying that if I do that and I'm able to jump, what I've just done is I've chosen to go with my rational brain, right?
I don't know if I would say it quite like that. You've separated your rational brain from your emotion and your fear. But what you've really done is separate out inside your brain an instinctual fear that's not rational. from a choice. And that's the back of your brain and the front of your brain, if you want to go into all that. But
limbic versus prefrontal
it
cortex.
is appropriate for your body to be afraid that you're going to die. It's very appropriate because that's true. It's also appropriate to be able to solve the problem and say, they've shown me rationally that this is safe. And there is still some risk, but the risk is really tiny. So how much risk am I willing to take? So it's about choosing. And by the way, we called it challenge by choice. It wasn't jump, it was choose. And if someone chose not to go, that was just as good as if they chose to go.
Yeah.
And this is the subject of Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air. You have people at the top of Everest choosing after years of training to turn around at the last minute because it's not smart. And everything about them says we should keep going. And it's incredibly difficult to overcome that because you've got all these other biases and stuff. So that's why I like that book. But when you're trying to do something after a major investment, you've got sunk costs, and there's all sorts of different things we could go with this, but it's an interesting spot. Just like the reason I thought of that was mostly because of the very simple exercise of the table. You activated your body to help you understand your emotions and your thinking. And I think that's great because they all belong together as a system. They
do. Well, goes back to kind of the piece that feels a little like it's missing for me, and I'm very excited about it, which is, okay, so now I'm up there and I've just made the choice I've chosen to not be on the platform anymore and to be in the air. And somehow this is going to transform me as a leader.
Rarely. What I discovered, it was really fun. They might get through this discussion and go, okay, I get it. And then nothing would happen. And in the experiential education world, we call that transfer of learning. You can transfer a simple skill. So now I know how to tie a knot. Great. What's that going to do for me? I can do a generalized skill and say, okay, I recognize my fear. I could use that elsewhere. Or you can have a metaphoric transfer, which is, this is going to be from now on the way I think about difficult choices. I'm going to think about it as that moment where I have to decide, what's the risk? Am I going to jump or not? So metaphoric transfer is probably the most powerful when it comes to difficult choices. But I still found, even knowing all that, it was better for me to change my career and start working with people live in the moment at work than in some ropes course in Utah or something, because the change of going from that offsite place, we could easily just say, oh, that was just there.
Yeah.
But when you're at work and you're facing that same type of situation, it's all the same. I don't feel like I can act because I feel risk. I'm all sweaty. My feet are nervous, whatever it might be. We often get the same intense physical reaction at work, but some people do. But the basic actions are the same. And I decided for me, it was a lot more challenging to try to create that space at work in the office with real time than it was to do it in these ropes course settings. So that's how I ended up in HR, because I like doing this, but I like doing it where people can actually see. And then if you take the design thinking piece, it takes iterations. We call it the psychological term is close approximations of new behavior, and you have to iterate. So the spiral is such a really interesting symbol. It takes you something like 20 or 30 tries to be able to do it with fluency.
Close approximations of new behavior. So I want to do a better handstand in yoga. So I need to do 20 mediocre handstands where I can't actually balance to get to that one where I can.
Hopefully they're incrementally better each time. And you're using a model to compare yourself and you're getting feedback. Because if you try to do it by yourself with a video or a picture you saw a while ago, it's really hard to know if that mediocre handstand was actually any different.
Oh, interesting.
And even better, if you're scientific about it, you'd want to measure how was it different. So I think we're just barely scratching the surface with assessment and feedback at work. It's really, really rudimentary right now. But if somebody had decent hypotheses or ideas about how they wanted to be better, and they shared it with all their friends and said, hey, so here's an example I did once. I was really drinking far too much soda. I used to drink soda 2 or 3 times a day. In college, I drank pure Coke. somehow I graduated to Diet Coke, and I was still drinking 2 or 3 when I was at Hulu. And I was like, this has got to stop. It's free. All I got to do is walk by and drink it. At IDEO, we had the same problem with M&Ms. So we used to have these bowls of M&Ms out, and everybody ate them, and they're like, wow, I'm eating a lot of M&Ms. So we decided we did an experiment there where we put out the M&Ms. We said if we just took them away, everybody'd be mad. So instead, we're going to put out a bowl of fruit. Well, then we found out people couldn't eat the fruit because it wasn't cut. So it was still easier to eat the M&Ms. So we cut the fruit up or used grapes. And people still kind of picked the M&Ms sometimes. Then what we did is we put out a sign next to the fruit and grapes that had a handful of M&Ms and a handful of fruit and showed how many calories were in each one. People started taking the fruit all the time.
Boom.
So that was a relatively sophisticated way to change behavior because there were steps and there was measurements and there was, it was iterative. Eventually we put the chocolate in the cupboard, and eventually we never bought any more chocolate because nobody ate it. Wow. But if we would have started with just putting it in the cupboard, we would have had a lot of resistance. So imagine applying that to something like Diet Coke. I couldn't do it myself. So I had a really great colleague who was always bringing me Diet Cokes to our meetings because I always go meeting to meeting to meeting. And she was like, oh, I know you'd want this. And I was, oh, thank you. And at some point I had to say, I don't want to drink Diet Cokes anymore. Could you help me? And so she stopped bringing me Diet Cokes, which was really helpful. But I had to share that with my friends and colleagues so that they could say, if I had a Diet Coke, hey, John, what's up? You still want that or not? I had to choose it, but they could help me. So that's the kind of stuff I like to do at work.
Oh, okay. I love this. I love this so much. So tying this back to empowerment, how is this, I'm guessing this is an example of empowerment.
Well, sure. I mean, in all cases that we've been talking about, at some point, you want to allow the person to choose because that's when they have power. And the problem I have with work in general is we have this massive, I call it the dominant mindset from the manufacturing and industrial world, where people are actually designed into the system as objects. They're not human. And when you were working for Henry Ford, you were on the manufacturing line. Today, that's being done by machines because they didn't know how to make the machines back then, but they wanted you to check your brain at the gate and do what you're supposed to do and never disrupt. So you became told. That would be the opposite. We could have a dark podcast called Told.
I love it.
Instead of allowed. And so most people go to work and say, I was tasked with this today. And you're like, you were tasked. Okay. Are you in prison? Like what caused you to be tasked? So that's where empowerment starts to me, that's the edges where you can start to go, open that up a little bit and use some language that's about you wanting to do this and that you chose it. Or that even if you don't want to do it, you still chose it because it's the right thing right now. And build agreements with people around you. Don't be told. And so that's how empowerment works. You have to. So if it's a job that I'm doing, I interview for the job because I wanted to work there. And then I get there and my boss tells me what to do and I do it. And I become an employee. So I like to build things in the culture that are more, intentional about that process. We don't want to call people employees because there's a connotation that that's from the industrial model. Just all kinds of cues, like you said, in the culture that would make me give away my power and feel like I don't have a choice. So if we can remove some of those, and we also then have to teach everybody to become powerful.
Yeah.
Which is where we get to the fear stuff.
All right, let's get into it. I would love to get into it through perhaps the side door, the back door, the bottom door of your basement, John. And I want to understand fear. This seems to be so central in your career. And, I think to be an adventurer requires some interesting grappling of the psyche with fear. For
sure. That kind of just gave me chills. Sorry.
Me too. True. Well, you gave me chills. So, let's talk about fear. And I'd love if we could actually start with you. I think it'd be useful to kind of start from the inside out as being a person who is in the world creating or opening the door, signaling the possibility, I'm not sure how to put it, of others discovering that they had more capacity, more courage than they thought. Mm-hmm. What's been your relationship with fear? And where does fear show up for you in the process of the work that you do?
Wow. Well, it's something I've thought a lot about, so I can answer that somewhat quickly on a couple of fronts, but know that that's not how easy it is to be able to talk about this. So a couple of things come to mind. One is just the high level way I understand fear. I've been educated a bit in this process, and we used to have this thing we called the fatal fears. And I understand fear as something that leads you to believe you're going to die. So that's what creates the depth, I think, of some of the ways people behave, is that at some point they actually think they're going to die. The quick read on it is, I feel like I'm going to be left out or omitted, and then I'll be alone and I won't be able to care for myself and I'm going to die. So it's pretty far away, but the front end of it is something like, I need to be right, or I need to be accepted. So for me, it's about being accepted. And I can play, family psychologist. I think people are formed relatively early in life. My education was in family systems, so I believe that's part of it. I was the youngest. I was the younger of two children, and in my family, I always felt like I was behind. So I think there's got to be something there. I don't have a conscious memory of saying, "Oh gosh, I'm going to be left out," but I did feel growing up like I was not going to be included. And so I think a lot of what drives me as an adult is to overcome that and to get to a place where I'm not acting out of fear, but I'm acting out of love. And what that requires me to do is actually become independent and step forward in a way that I'm only now just starting to realize the full power of that. So if I'm at work and I'm trying to create space, I have a couple of friends who know me really well. They know that sometimes I like to play on the periphery instead of being in the center, because then I can be smart and have good ideas, but not actually put my own courage in and take any risks. And if it doesn't work, I can just separate. At my current job, I learned that if I'm going to be effective, I'm going to have to step up and actually be the change. And you've heard that a million times, but I think I understand it more now, that if I don't use myself as an example or as an anchor, it's hard for me to create space for someone else. And it's my responsibility to do that. So I use my desire to be a good human to overcome the fear of being wrong or left out. And it's a constant battle. I mean, every day I'm afraid.
That's so awesome. When you're afraid, does that feel different from the kind of fears that you've been referencing earlier in the show? The kinds of fears that might stop you from taking the leap? Because it does actually sound like you're taking a different kind of leap, just given your own psychology.
I think the physical manifestation is very similar. You have a clenched stomach, you feel it in the pit in your stomach, and you feel tense, so your muscles still react. I think where I go in my head, and I use lots of different techniques like breathing, which helps with your core. I have this website I made called Everyday Presence, which is a bunch of really simple breathing exercises. I found that if I'd find myself in the middle of a daily task, like folding laundry, resenting it, like, I have to do this, I'm busy, I'm too good for that, whatever is in your head about why you shouldn't be doing it. I actually really like physical labor. I love cleaning. I love doing the dishes. And at some point I was like, well, if I love doing the dishes, why am I sitting here annoyed that I'm doing the dishes? So how can I turn that into a powerful opportunity to make myself stronger? So breathing was the way to do that. And it doesn't require meditation. It just requires consciousness of your breathing while you're doing this task. And I find that's really helpful.
Yeah, I didn't actually know about your website before, but it's awesome. I checked it out. It's so much fun and it's beautiful. And we'll definitely link to that in the show notes for the listeners who are interested. I think it's like packed with very, very valuable, actionable things that you can just apply right now, no matter where you are. It's great. Thank you for making that. I want to I want to, continue to press on this and go deeper in, because, so many people rely on their chief people officer or their, VP of HR as the one who's kind of the guardian of their human experience at work. And not just that, but also the lifeline to their benefits, the well-being of their families, the policies that govern the way that they work, the way that they will be evaluated, the way that they may or may not be promoted or exited, and also the selection of the people who are going to be their teammates. Not to mention like the conditions in which they work. And that is that's a lot of expectation to roll up through the ranks to you, I can imagine. It's not a position I've ever had.
Well, I think when you start with a word like guardian, you're heading below the line with the hero thing. Like I think there's a lot of HR people out there, and this is no criticism. I'm just saying it's really common, and it's easy to do, to become the advocate or the guardian against the man. And I think that's not a real productive way to run a business. And it might have been necessary, and it is necessary, I'm sure, in some cases. So it's not that it's wrong necessarily, but the way I think of it is that my job is to create sustainable high performance. And so the only way to do that is to actually flip it the other way and think about what are all the things that would be necessary to create sustainable high performance. So I empathize with humans, understand them, and try to put into place conditions that allow that to happen. So we're back to that container. Mm-hmm. I think HR is just, we're the construction of the container that the business needs to achieve its goals. And so that's eminently applicable to any business that requires creative human output.
Is the way that I described, thank you for that. I mean, I think it is a really different way to think about the role than I feel most people think about it. Most employees, quote employees, think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not a person with a big corporate background, so I've never had a big HR organization around me, but I have lots of close friends who have. And things I hear often, it is about this kind of like there's a paternalistic relationship with HR of they're going to take care of me. And they're the ones who are supposed to be taking care of me. And yet I know a lot of people who are in HR, and I realize that there's a lot of tension there in that from that orientation. There's a lot of tension in what their role is. And can you speak to that a little bit? Like, is that how we should see HR?
I think you're hitting on the idea of reciprocity now. Like the reason I came across that term and kind of adopted it was because it's different than dependency and paternalism. And I think organizational structures are hierarchical, and that's not necessarily wrong. But when you're in a hierarchy, you don't have to be paternalistic. You could be treating each other as adults who are making choices and building agreements. And I think so it's not about shifting to some of these radical concepts like holacracy or something more organic as a structure. It's about behaviors that are more adult, and they're more built on respect and interdependence, and a lot less about you take care of me. Now that said, there are some, there's also a great model around leadership changing depending on the situation that's super famous. And now I can't think of the name of it. It's situational leadership. The idea there is that someone who is younger or less experienced might require more structure. So you give them the structure. This is, part of the facilitation. It makes it easier for them. But someone who's more mature and more capable shouldn't have that structure. That's going to be crushing them or closing them off. So you take away structure. And HR often isn't that nuanced. Sometimes it's one size fits all policy. And that doesn't work for everyone. So then you're dealing with statistics and bell curves, which means the middle gets what they need and the two extremes get nothing. So we can go on a huge tangent here. This is a really big topic, but fundamentally it's a different way of thinking about two adults being together. It's equals that are interdependent, not a one with more authority taking care of the other one who has to be submissive.
It's a big change. So if I were working in an organization and I've got an HR business partner that I'm working with who's there representing my team, representing might even fall into that paternalistic mindset, working with my team, partnering with my team. What are some ways that I might better engage with them to really create a stronger partnership and that empowers me and empowers them?
So you're the employee, or you're the bit. So, I think you have to, this is back to capacity again. You have to have a little bit of a vision about what you want. And so the dance here is when someone comes to, if I'm the business partner and someone comes to me asking for help, you want to start asking questions. So it's a tricky one. On your call, one of your other podcasts, you were talking about who's below the line and who's causing me to do what. So it's an interesting dance. If I come to a business partner below the line saying, I need you to fix this for me, you hope you're going to run into a business partner that says, can I ask some questions, versus say, okay, I'll be your hero and I'll fix it. So I'm not sure who starts that problem, honestly.
Yeah,
if I come to the business partner and I'm above the line, I might encounter a below the line business partner. And that might be frustrating because I'm trying to get advice and they give me control, or they say no, they pull a policy move and say, I'm sorry, that's above your pay grade. That would be annoying. So how I would work around that would be very different. So it really depends on who's on which side there.
Yeah, got it. What are some of the most empowering ways that we can invest in our employees? There's a lot out there.
Well, I think coaching is a really useful thing. That's why one of the reasons that, that's why we're working together. I have people that are senior that are struggling with their ability to make choices. And it usually comes into maybe they're not quite as aware of where they need to be. So they need help learning how to locate themselves. I think that's a really helpful thing for employees. There should be a systematic way for people when they come into an organization to get help locating themselves. That would be awesome. And I can say that in the context of your podcast, trying to explain that to a CFO and a bunch of marketing people, it's a lot harder. So we have to kind of wrap that in programming and, lead them there. I think you also have to provide visuals. So I like the idea of maps and navigation. So instead of telling someone what to do, I can give them a map and say, where would you like to be? So probably if I could boil it down, we want to give employees enough one-on-one time and ask them a lot of questions. And then they're going to probably grow. Those would be some of the levers.
It sounds so simple. And it also, it points back to, instead of filling my one-on-one meeting with my employee with a bunch of advice and tactical status updates and project planning and putting out fires, instead of filling it up with all that content, my job actually as a manager is creating a container full of context.
Yeah, and questions.
And which questions are, it's opening up, it's shining a light on more empty space, more unknown. And sitting there and waiting for an answer when 5 minutes ago in your last meeting, your manager thought that the sky was falling, does require a lot of courage.
That can be hard.
Yeah, it does require a lot of courage. So I think it's just very cyclical, and it makes sense that this is work that is so important to do from the inside, where you can really hold that whole system and see all the layers and how they're interdependent.
Yeah, and being able to walk around and see it helps a lot. I think that's the other thing I think that you have to learn in the world of HR is you can't do it all. We used to say another one of those cliches is I have to do it myself, but I don't have to do it alone. You choose to do the work, but you want to be on a team of people because there's no way you can ever do this all by yourself.
Yeah. Well, John, that was so awesome. It's been such a treat to have you here today. And I'm really, it's been wonderful as well, just knowing you that, to the degree that I do, and really being a huge admirer of your work for years, to get to work with some of your team in Forward Fearless and just to get to have that little bit of a connection there with them.
Yeah, it's really
Is there
nice.
anything that you'd share as advice? Just, sometimes managers reach out about, is that a good choice for them? And I think it's one thing I really admire about you is you create the space for them to make a choice, and maybe you could just speak to that briefly.
Yeah, well, we started with a framework, and I took 40 people who are more senior people at the company through a 2-day program that included an introduction to the conscious leadership model. And we did a very high level introduction to it so they could sort of be aware of it. And then I followed that up with some targeted invitations to people who I thought might benefit by exploring further, who showed interest in the course. It was a 2-day meeting, not a course, but and so to be able to pair what you do individually or allow them to join, I like that it's done in a group. So it's not one-on-one coaching, I think is very difficult to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
When you're learning with a peer group, I think that's super powerful. So your format actually worked out really well for me. And I think it's also really hard so we toyed with the idea of having you build a peer group of our managers or our leaders together and leading that. And it very quickly became a boundary issue. So rather than because some of the things that you do in your program, like if you're really going to dig into fear, then you're going to share things you maybe don't want your colleagues to know about at that moment. So it's a safer place to do it in one, sort of in a one of our people with a mix of your people. That setting works really well because they can go deeper and not feel exposed. And I've had a couple of them, in particular, one person who's told me several times, "Oh my God, this is really stretching me. I'm glad no one else knows," because it's hard to break that boundary at work and be that vulnerable and open in one setting and then go to another setting and feel like, you're naked. So that's a really nice format for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it works really well. And then of course the next step is bringing it home. So
yeah, and then bringing them back and having somebody like me help them apply it
exactly
solves that problem that we had before, because there are real choices happening at work where I know they've been to your course and I can use the content as part of my facilitation to help them make a tough choice when they're at work. And it's really helpful.
It's great. And it's great having your partnership there too, to help facilitate that. Oh, John, what a treat to see you.
Too.
What a treat to see you.
Day.
Yeah, super fun. I'm really excited. You have a lot of resources to share. And listeners, John has generously offered to share with you a booklet that he's created that's filled with incredibly useful thoughts, exercises, tools, frameworks. And I think you're going to find it extremely valuable. John, the name of this is?
It's called Be True. And
Be
it's
True.
about
Yes.
helping yourself align with who you want to be. And so if you're going to make choices, it's nice to know somewhere that you'd like to be so you can choose to go there.
And so often what keeps us stuck is we don't know where we'd like to be. We just don't know. So it's a brilliant piece of content that is really powerful if you apply it. Like all work, you get what you give, what you put into it. So I really encourage you to go to caneel.com/podcast. Do it now. I will facilitate this being easy for you by encouraging you to open up your browser and do it now. And if you go to today's website, you can also go to Aloud Podcast. That might be easier. Yeah. aloudpodcast.com. And you can find it there, and please download it. Please, make an appointment with yourself, print it out right now, open it up in the back, whatever you need to do to kind of cue yourself, because knowing where you're going, to John's point about vision, and actually connecting this back to one of our very earliest episodes on the change formula, which links up nicely, and I'll link to that as well. Without vision, there is no change. Without vision, there is no change. And your alternative, hi, honey. This is really important. You're right. Without change, without vision, my daughter Era's waiting for me.
Without interruptions, there's no serendipity.
The alternative is discomfort. And you probably need a little blend of both. So if you're feeling some discomfort, hold on, babe. If you're feeling some discomfort, then, amp up the vision and you can get there faster, and add a little support and you're golden. You can overcome that resistance to change.
That's your second command. Pick a friend and do it with somebody else. It's a lot more fun.
Oh, for sure. And if you guys live in the LA area, when we get back in wanting to see each other physically, not just wanting to, but being willing to, we'll be having some more Conscious Leadership LA dinners. And hopefully, John, you'll attend again, and I'll certainly be hosting. So you can contact me for that as well. And you guys can reach out to John. I'll put his URL on the website. I'll put his social handles on the website. I got to get back to my daughter now. She is jonesing for headphones or crackers or her iPad charger or something like that.
Just a great big hug from Mom.
Yeah, that's probably the main thing. I'm a pretty good substitute for the TV, though. Sometimes. Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
What a pleasure. Thanks, Caneel.
And thank you, listeners, for showing up for yourselves, and for everyone else around you who supports you and cares about you, and whom you support and empower through your being. Bye-bye.